Hello, Commander Runningcloud here. Well, okay, the title of this one is Church is God's Home. Um, but as usual, I'm going to go off topic before I get on topic. Last night, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm awakened with my ears ringing and my heart palpitating. Now, in this hotel 2 months ago, in November, so a month ago, I had to go to the hospital because my heart started palpitating 3, 4 nights in a row. This particular hotel is called the Wood Springs Suites, and it's in Indio, California, which is part of the Coachella Valley, which is where Palm Springs is. Palm Springs is northwest of here, about 25 minutes, 25 minutes. Indio is a kind of a working class town, and it's under great development plans right now. But it doesn't look like the developments are benefiting Indigenous Americans very much. It seems to be more for European immigrants from the way the streets are being made and other things. Now, this hotel where I'm staying is the nicest hotel in this area. There's a really nice hotel I like in Palm Springs in my price range, but in this area, this is the nicest hotel, and it's cheaper than the other hotels. So when you have a cheaper hotel, you know that this is not where the Europeans will be staying, because the Europeans will be able to afford the better hotels, quote, better hotels. Although, like I said, this hotel I showed you before in previous videos, there's a kitchen here, refrigerator, little stove. There's a mall you can walk to do all your shopping. There's even a storage across the street and over across the street the other way. There's open space that's rapidly closing, but there's open space where you can take a somewhat private walk a little bit. But there's also a lot of surveillance here with the glitter cars, the cars with the glitter headlights. They've got a lot of them running day and night. So that's an offense that we saw in Houston, a strategy of the enemy to take over and control the land, not with tanks, not with rolling tanks, but with very noticeable weaponized headlights that hurt your eyes, that can be seen from miles and miles away. And day before yesterday, when I took a walk, one of them cut my contact again. So I've been having flashbacks of being in the FEMA camp in Houston, flashbacks of that. And then, I look at my credit score, and my credit scores dropped again. I don't know why. I didn't do anything different, but I think maybe the Moore Law Group has something to do with that, since they seem to be strategically buying up any debt notes of mine that they see, and they are firmly embedded in making money by creating unpayable debts and then prosecuting debtors. In Europe, the prosecution of debtors was one way that the monarchy kept control of the people and kept them down. Debtors' prison was what their prisons used to be called, and people were put in prison for owing money so that rich people could oppress poor people that couldn't pay. Well, my class of hotel, like I told you during my videos in Houston, I know a lot of them I put on private because I was really trying to make a new start here. I was really hopeful that I wouldn't still be on the front lines of the war. I guess that's every soldier's dream, right? Is every soldier's dream for a peace accord? I've got flu in my teeth. Sorry. Hate to smile with food in my teeth on video. And this is live, so I can't is every soldier's wish for the war to end? Because God, Lord have mercy, I certainly do. So I put a lot of my videos on private because I didn't want my new friends, my new acquaintances, my new community to know too much about how crazy I sound in the old days, because most people don't believe that there are FEMA camps in America. Most people don't believe that the Europeans are actively involved in taking over American lands and waters and airspace, even though we've got. Do you remember when Elon Musk, before he maneuvered his way to control Twitter, do you remember when he talked about the Doge coin, the DOGE coin, and now he's anticipating being the second man to the president with an agency called Dodge. Now, either that's some time traveling, looking glass stuff, or it's a coincidence, and I don't believe much in coincidence. So we've got a European who made his money killing South Africans and stealing their stuff. And I think, didn't his father get emeralds from Rhodesia? So we've got, a European with all of his entire wealth base comes from murdering indigenous peoples and stealing their property. And then we've got Vivek Ramaswamy by his side, an East Indian who turned his back on his sister, called her out. She's trying to be passing. What was her name? Haley? The woman who ran for president, and then Vivek said, oh, she's an East Indian, and then everybody found out that she was trying to pass. And Vivek owns a pharmaceutical company too, pharmaceuticals, which we all have come to mistrust in many, many ways, right? Since COVID. Haven't we all taken a second look at the medical? In fact, we started taking a second look at the medical industry a long time ago before COVID, right? I mean, the way that medical doctors were robbed of any autonomy they had as entrepreneurs was with the advent of the HMO, and the media, the fake news, created the public awareness that they were taking over by making news reports about malpractice and doctors that didn't care, which were just a few back then because each doctor's reputation depended on his work. But now doctors are hiding within huge organizations which are owned by other organizations. I can't tell you what I'm going through with a hospital bill from John F. Kennedy Hospital, which is the community hospital here in Indio, one of them. The other one's named for Eisenhower. You think that's going to be better? I don't know. I just know that all the tricky manipulations that they did at JFK ought to be against the law. And all the Europeans behind the curtain who were the professionals getting the big bucks, with the local looking people at the front desk getting nothing and being hired for their rudeness, their ability to be rude and callous and disrespectful. Well, the hotel I'm in comes up online as one of the cheapest in the area, right? Which has been what I've had to do since the Moore Law Group and Patty Koch evicted me in Phoenix after denying me a new lease because I called the police about the gang stalkers that they had living there who were attacking me on the regular, and how many times I had to call the police to try to get police protection, right? I tried, but it got to the point where I could go all the way to Glendale and the police would mock me. Police would mock me in Glendale when my car was vandalized while I was at a workshop for real estate investing. And I call the police because people vandalized my car and the police are mocking me. And I gave to the police association sticker on my car, and the police actually said to me while they're mocking me, oh, we don't care about that. So, you're part of the system, supposedly, but you don't know who you are in the system. And that's the problem. You see, they teach us that the police serve and protect everybody. But what they really mean is that the police act like they act in Europe. They protect the interests of the monarch class and persecute those in poverty. Most of our police came here from Ireland because in Ireland they were good and mad about the way that the Brits had been exploiting them and treating them. The way the Brits made sure that the Irishmen were forced to sell their meat, their cows, to England, to the wealthy in England, to the point where they had nothing to eat themselves but potatoes in order to pay the taxes to the queens and the other royals, to be a part of the Commonwealth that was imposed upon them. Sinead O'Connor died furious about these kinds of things. The whole Irish War that started internally was provoked by these British oppression. The potato blight, they were forced to eat nothing but potatoes because they had to sell all their meat to England to stay alive and to avoid the royal guard, the royal policemen. And what they did was they had a blight, some kind of an infection got in the potato crop, so they started starving to death. And that provoked a lot of them to come to America, to make their way here. The only thing they had to do was beat down the indigenous people. That's all they had to do. All they had to do was make sure that my people got the beat down. If my people would get the beat down, there'd be no problem with the Irish coming here. So the British, who were in the ruling class of Europeans in America, buying roads, buying property, you'll see Queensland, Queens Road. That's not a joke. That's real. They took those properties over and distributed them to their royalties. So the Irish, when they came over here, they were not as good as the Brits in the social system that the Brits had put here. In fact, there used to be signs in stores, no Irish allowed. They were treated just as horribly here as they were in Europe because of the ruling class that was surveilling them, watching them, making sure that they didn't get a leg up. So a lot of those Irishmen became cops. So they're already enraged. They're already angry. They're already looking for someone to be less than them because they're part of a hierarchy. They've been made a part of a hierarchy. They've been made a part of a hierarchy. So they have to continue. They have to be better than someone. So who are they better than? Blacks. Boston. There were so many riots in Boston during the late 1970s as the Europeans were angry and protesting and making sure that indigenous people didn't get anything from the economic system. So when I think of cops, I generally think of Irishmen first. And I think of how they got here. And I think of how the Irishmen were a part of immigration as war. I talked about, well, I didn't talk about it here, but I talked about in the Young Turks. I made a comment on, they were doing a show on Vivek Ramaswamy and the way a European woman newscaster reminded him that wasps are the highest in the hierarchy of people aspiring to be European in the European system, and that the Europeans own the system, they police the system, they control the system. Well, and anyway, in a comment in the Young Turks, I talked about how immigration laws have been used as weapons against the indigenous people of America. What we're seeing now is that now that other people are starting to migrate here and the Europeans have lost control of funneling their own people in, directly from Europe into the suburbs, into great jobs, into the economic system of success, not into the poverty line where they've got me, not into the poverty line, where they've got me and all my people. Okay? No matter how much I accomplish, I never get a piece. And you want to know what the funny thing is? Sheldon L. Epstein of Illinois, Winnetka, Wilmette, not sure which one. I think Wilmette. He told me when I was just 17 years old, a couple of weeks outside of 17, when I, as an inroads intern, said, "Will you be my mentor? You seem like an ambitious guy." And here I am in this law department as a legal trainee, something that's never existed before. And he told me that every lawyer used to be trained by another lawyer, and that the tradition that I was in was the oldest tradition, that formal schools to teach lawyers was something relatively new. And for me to be his apprentice was the way it had been before. Well, that was a good part of that conversation with Shelley. The bad part of the conversation with Shelley is that he told me, no matter what you do, no matter what you become, if you succeed in becoming a lawyer, you'll never be able to live in my neighborhood. Every house that's sold is sold with a covenant that says, do not sell to do not sell to a real American, do not sell to a Black American. So no matter how much you achieve, Silver Rain Running Cloud, you will never be able to participate in this economic system because it's run by us, the Epsteins, and well, he was not happy with the WASPs. In fact, he was one of the first Europeans I ever heard use the word WASP when he was talking about John F. Kennedy uh, as a way to reference his boss. Okay, the head of the patent law department of Brunswick. I saw him once in the 4 years that I worked there. He never came to work. Okay, he's not the only European, you know, executive that had an empty office all the time. In my experience, in my personal experience in Chicago, which had more world headquarters for European corporations than any other place in the States at the time in the 1970s. So I saw it all the time after I saw it at Brunswick. But Sheldon L. Epstein hated his boss so much and talked about his boss and said, we Jews do all the work and he gets the big bucks. I want a promotion. Well, they never gave Sheldon a promotion. So what he did was he decided to use his time mentoring me as his way up by blackmailing the company. He sent me into Chicago to do a research project. And while I was doing the research project, Sheldon L. Epstein filed an EEOC complaint in my name against himself. He filed a complaint against himself, but because it's all confidential, I didn't find out about it until 2014. And then David S. Gutman, who had come to Brunswick after I got there, and so he was the new guy, he confessed it to me. And he said, Sheldon is dead. Let's drop it. Sheldon is dead now. Let's drop it, but he's dead. And I said, yeah, David, but you conspired with him. You knew what he did. And David never denied it. He just said, well, what do you want from me? What do you want from me? Because he thought I was going to make him confess, right? But he already confessed. Well, David S. Gutman, I saw he has offices in Japan. And one of the projects that Sheldon L. Epstein had me do was help to do research on how to destroy Japan with anti-dumping laws. Japan was sending cheaper steel into America for construction, and Sheldon wanted to undermine their businesses. So he used the antitrust laws, because we were the patents, trademarks, corporate law division. We did patents and trademarks and, protecting licenses and anti-competition. So the antitrust division of the United States government, the United States corporation, government's private agency regulating trust matters, he used that to undermine the ability of Japan. Well, David S. Gutman actually went to work in Japan. So they furthered their invasion of Japan that Sheldon started there at Brunswick. But Shelley decided to use my economic future, to sabotage my economic future, to use me as a pawn in a play against Brunswick, because he was angry. He was like, listen, I'm not going to be getting paid anything extra for mentoring you. I'm like, dude, you're here all day doing nothing. You may as well do something, eh? Because they didn't have much work to do. I'll be honest. They didn't have much work to do. But Sheldon L. Epstein did the contract for air hockey for Brunswick. And he made Brunswick buku bucks of money. Buku bucks of money Shelley made with his license negotiations. And he was mad that the WASP was sitting in the seat of power and that Sheldon was just getting the peanuts. He also told me that he resented me for going to Northwestern because when he tried to go to Northwestern, they had a policy of no Jews. The WASPs, who discriminated against the Irish and discriminated against the Jews, wouldn't take him at Northwestern. But he ended up teaching at Northwestern in the Technological Institute, first as a lecturer, and when they didn't approve that, President Shapiro, President Levine, well, the Jews had become presidents of Northwestern by then. The Jews had taken over Northwestern Memorial Hospital and named it Feinberg Hospital. They'd taken over the Department of Arts and Sciences and named it Weinstein or Weinberg Arts and Sciences. They put their name on everything at Northwestern because they made enough money to buy their way in, which is pretty much how the East Indians were able to ascend so quickly into prominent roles in government. One of the men taking my land in Oklahoma with the Department of Transportation is an East Indian man who made his way into Oklahoma state government. So they did a very good job studying the British, being like the British. In fact, maybe they even trained the British, okay? Because I don't know. Because I want you to remember that when Columbus started his journeys from Portugal, right? He did it to find India for the spices and the gemstones. How did he know India had spices and gemstone unless Indian merchants made it that far north and that far west to Europe to show them? So even Columbus back in 1492 was following and chasing and looking for the Indians so that he could cash in on their wealth. So maybe the Indians started imperialism. I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know. I don't know. I just know imperialism has to end because I'm an indigenous person and I'm suffering greatly from the theft of my assets by foreigners, by deliberate control of things, by invasions, quiet invasions like the one I'm going to talk about here. I'll get to church. I'll get to talk about church. But I just have so many new viewers that I have to roll in my past to make sense, and also so that when they see me talking and it sounds off the wall, they don't say, wow, she is really crazy. Okay? Because one of the reasons why I'm even doing this broadcast has to do with a story that's going to sound like I'm really crazy. So immigration has been used as a way to invade this continent for a very long time. Immigration from the Pilgrims forward. So when the Irish were brought in, they were brought in full of rage and anger. They were brought in feeling second best, and they were brought in to protect the economic interests of the British who were paying them and giving them their marching directions. So they came in busting heads of Black people, sheriffs like the one in Alabama who put a fire hose on all those innocent people protesting to own their land. They weren't so much protesting to sit down and eat with Europeans as they were protesting their being forbidden to have their own restaurants, their own businesses, their own downtowns. And when the indigenous Black people, at least, for the Indians, it's different. For the Indians, it was the casinos and all the Europeans that took over the casinos, and how many Navajos were starving without water in their homes, indoor plumbing, and without heating through the winter in Arizona, while casinos, supposedly in the name of Indians, are springing up all over. How much of their water was stolen while the Europeans watched at places like the Talking Stick on the Pima Reservation. I watched them steal that water, the Europeans, using Mexican American labor, right? Using indigenous people labor. I guess that's the irony, is that the indigenous people are building their own prison and they don't even know it. They don't even know it. But at this hotel where I stay, you'll only see the poorest Europeans that can afford to stay anywhere. And people like me and people like the um, brown Americans working in the desert. You'll see a lot of them living here. So, because the price point, the economic system determines where you're going to go and where you're going to live. They don't have to look at you anymore. All they have to do is look at your credit report. All they have to do is look at your income, because they've made race an economic designation as well. You see, I could have been a corporate lawyer at Brunswick, a manager of the department, but Sheldon L. Epstein, a Jew, hating the WASPs, used me as a pawn because I didn't even matter to him. I was nothing to him. I was the enemy. They would work together to beat me before they would work apart. But I didn't even know about this because the government, enemies in government, decided that the EEOC had to be confidential. It wasn't until I was working at Illinois Bell and they unjustly persecuted and fired me that I even found out that EEOC had ever heard of me. When the Black women working in the EEOC department at Illinois Bell called me the day after I was unjustly fired to say, I'm sure you don't want to make an EEOC report. And then they started laughing because they knew that it took me 3 years to get a job after I graduated from college, because Sheldon L. Epstein put an EEOC complaint in my name that was a part of the HR community knowledge. So I couldn't get hired because they had branded me, Shelley branded me a troublemaker. Shelley also disappeared and failed to give me recommendations to law school. So on my record, I have 4 years spent at Brunswick Corporation in the law department as a novel thing called a legal trainee, learning trademarks, learning patent law, learning antitrust law, learning infringements, writing letters to inventors about why their inventions won't work, shepherdizing cases, writing briefs, writing research papers, writing business plans, doing all that. All that I did under the supervision of Sheldon L. Epstein at his command. And he sabotaged me because after he did the EEOC complaint, he stopped talking to me completely. I would call his home and his wife would answer the phone and she was almost laughing. Sharon L. Epstein, she was almost laughing every time I called because I didn't understand it. I was just a child. In the world of business, I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why I was blacklisted in Chicago. I didn't understand. I didn't understand why Shelley didn't give me a recommendation to law school to tell all the great things that I did that would easily have me easily beat the competition, even though my GPA was only a 2.34, because when they saw my race in a subject as ugh, subjective as British literature, I got C's all the time for the curve. I would go to where the papers were. People didn't always pick up their papers. And I'd sit there and I'd look through the papers of the Europeans and I didn't see better work than mine. But I would always get the low grade. And I go into the professor to office hours, right? I'd say, well, why did I get this grade on this paper? And the only answer that I can remember, because they were all bull, Well, you don't, it's an issue of tone. Tone. I said, what is tone? How can I address this tone issue that's putting my grades down? And they couldn't ever tell me. And do you want to know when I figured out what tone meant? When I was contracting as a consultant at the Standard Oil Company after it became Amoco for antitrust reasons, supposedly as a business strategy, where they also used the antitrust department. Well, I was working at Amoco Company as a consultant in their facilities management computer programming, which is where all the budgets come from. And I was doing work and I was outstanding. My boss found me outstanding. Um, and he wanted to offer me a job, but I told his front man, no way, no way, you can't pay me enough to come back into a corporation when I have my own company and I'm getting paid an executive level salary as a consultant. No way. That was Wayne Norris. But anyway, while I was working there as a consultant, there was a girl working there as an employee, and her name was Deborah Bass. And Deborah Bass was lovely. She wore false eyelashes before false eyelashes were popular. I don't know if she wore a wig like I do now. I didn't wear a wig then, but I think she had a weave. I think she had, one of the first weaves. And she was brown skinned, big pretty eyes, false eyelashes, great figure, very nice girl. But she talked Ebonics. She spoke Ebonics. And she worked very hard and she was a good programmer because the programs, they don't see you. As long as you enter in the right code, you're speaking their language. They're not looking at your race. They're not looking at your idiom. They're looking at your work. So Debbie knew she was doing a super good job. I really liked her a lot. And she got a low evaluation. And she was asking me to help her figure out what she could do to be better. And her boss said something, it wasn't tone exactly, but it was a euphemism for you're black and you talk black and you are black and you're never going to get a promotion here because we are racist. Not because you're black, because the computer doesn't care. It's not because you're black, it's because we are racist, right? And that's when I understood what tone means. The tone means you're black. Now my American grammar skills were excellent then. My aunt, my grandmother, my mother, my aunts, my great grandpa, teachers, 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 all teachers. So if you spoke improper grammar in my home, you couldn't finish your sentence until you corrected it. In fact, my mother and my aunt used to have little arguments about what the correct grammar would be and what the grammar mistake is that was made. Oh, that's a hanging participle. Whatever, right? So for me, it wasn't an issue of speaking Ebonics. I've been persecuted in Black communities for not speaking Ebonics. So that wasn't the issue. But when he said tone and could never really define tone, you go into a literature professor, you say, how come I'm getting a C? This is a great paper. Took me hours. I write for lawyers during the summer. What is wrong with this paper? And he says, tone, tone. Then they're just telling you we're racist, right? Because the TAs graded the papers anyway. That was the big secret back then, was that you parents forking out all that money, thinking your children are being taught and trained by the greatest brains that the academy could find. You're being deceived. They're being taught by graduate students, and some of them don't even speak English. At the University of Massachusetts, there was a lovely Chinese graduate student. She got sent away when SARS. Remember when that aerial Chinese disease came out? Well, in the 1990s. Well, she got, kicked out of school for that. But before Su Shen left the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, she was TAing classes and she did not speak English. Tell me how that works, right? And then there was Michael Shepard, the Dutchman, who was a PhD candidate in my department, comparative lit. And he told me, I don't read those papers, just give them all B's. Don't read them, don't correct them, don't try to teach and train them, just give them all B's because, they won't complain about a B. Well, that was his. So if you think that you're sending your kids off to college and they're going to be trained by good teachers, you better find out how many TAs are involved, because they don't all take training your kids seriously like I did, right? And I'm not allowed in the academy, right? But plagiarist Henry Louis Gates is, to great acclaim. Plagiarist Hazel Carby is, to great acclaim. Plagiarist Valerie Smith of Swarthmore is. Plagiarist Brent Hayes Edwards is. You got to be a plagiarist, like Sheldon Epstein. So Sheldon made it so I couldn't go to law school. His actions also made it so I couldn't find a job for 3 years out of college. Now, I already had a degree in English literature with no recommendations from 4 years working during the summer. Well, that'll deep six you just by itself. But throw in an EEOC complaint and you can really see. But once Sheldon had filed the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, was founded as a part of the affirmative action psych op. And what they did was they supposedly investigated and worked to correct employment discrimination from racists. But they didn't do that. They just collected data on the troublemakers and made sure that those people who fought for their justice and their rights and for equal opportunity made sure that they were going to be out of sight because they weren't going to be able to afford to live. So Sheldon L. Epstein made sure that I couldn't make a living out of college. If a wonderful man had not fallen in love with me and taken me in, I would have had to go live with my grandmother in Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C. is a terrible place to try to look for a husband in the 70s. The Vietnam War was a deliberate strategy to remove indigenous men from the mating pool. And Washington, D.C. was known for having a ratio of 7 women for every man. So every man felt entitled to cheat, and every woman felt lucky if she was sharing. She felt lucky to share because it's share or nothing. And I learned that firsthand with a DC boy in college. So I didn't want to go to DC and live with my grandmother, who was a guidance counselor and a teacher in a high school there. I didn't want to do that. So I was lucky that my boyfriend loved me so much that I said, listen, I can't get a job. I can't find a job. I got to go. I got to live with my grandmother. And he said, no, come live with me instead. So I did. But I came from righteous people. So my cousins were not allowed to visit me because I was shacked up. There were stories about me in the family about how you should not follow me because I was one of the oldest girls. But don't be like Silver Rain Runningcloud. She's a shack up, Josh. She's a shack up. Yeah, it was humiliating because I was a goody two-shoes and still am. I mean, I really valued my reputation as a moral person. So when I was shacked up, it was humiliating. And it took me 3 years to get my fiance to become my husband. And I really had to put my foot down and move out and say, well, I'm sorry. I'm about to be 24. That means your time is up. I must move on to the next candidate for marriage and family. Bye. And he said, no, please wait. I said, and he said, And I said, bye. And he said, no, please wait. And finally, we tied the knot. Finally, we got married and stayed married for 22 years, you know. But it wasn't really what he wanted, and it wasn't really what he wanted out of his life. He didn't want to be married. He didn't want to be married young. He just needed someone. He needed someone who could survive, someone who knew how to take care of herself. And we had two beautiful kids, beautiful children. And I was able to be a stay-at-home mom, which became my dream. It wasn't my dream. I always thought I'd be a working mom until I saw my son, my firstborn child. And as soon as I saw my firstborn child, I didn't want anyone to take him more than 10 feet from my heart. I suffered greatly when I had to go back to work after 7 weeks at home with him. And I got extra time with him. I got extra time because, the doctor, the obstetrician had mercy. The obstetrician had mercy on everyone, on us, and gave me an extra week. But I had a really great job at the Bank of America when it was called First National Bank of Chicago. I had a really great job there where I didn't have any work at all, but I was getting paid big bucks. I was getting paid in the top 1% of women in America as a computer programmer in the bank trust department. But the bank trust department program was already written, and they were about to buy a Hogan system, a system called Hogan, which was centralized banking. So they didn't need a trust programming department at all. But they still had us on, they still paid us. And our job was to try not to make it obvious that we had no work. So my coworker was a guy named Jimmy Alexander, and Jimmy was brilliant. And Jimmy was a black man, and he invested in property on the far south side of Chicago. And in Vietnam, he said that the black men were the ones that filled the body bags using a shovel. And I thought that was interesting. Especially when I found, that movie, The King of Harlem. It made me wonder, well, did he really shovel? But it doesn't matter because Jimmy had great integrity and he was a wonderful man. And he took every single course that the American Banking Association offered to bankers. He took their entire curriculum. He got awards for taking more courses from the bank training programs than anybody else did. Yeah, man. Jimmy was so cool. I love Jimmy so much. So, but Jimmy was married, and he was much older than I was. And he was just always, very appropriate with me. Always appropriate with me. I think that's why I still love Jimmy. Anyway, Jimmy Alexander was a great and wondrous man. And there was a song out at that time called Outstanding. Girl, you knocked me out. Exciting. You make me scream and shout. Well, anyway, he used to sing that song when I was because I sat right across the cubicle from him. And I knew that he was admiring me. And that's as far as he ever went, was to, express that he respected me for my brains and that I came to work looking pretty nice. Well, I got pregnant on that job, and oh boy, did my looks change. My looks changed so much that Terry Soderbergh, the European executive that never came to work, he came to work with a 3D camera to take pictures of me because I got so ugly. And when he finished taking these 3D pictures with this fancy 3D camera, he put everybody's picture on the bulletin board except mine. My picture was not on the bulletin board because I looked so ugly. I mean, when I got pregnant, my feet swole, my nose swole, my face got so deformed from the way it usually looked that I wondered, will I ever be pretty again? Will I ever look nice again? Did this pregnancy change my face forever? I mean, it's one thing to, the hard to walk, the big belly, all that stuff, but my face changed, right? Well, my face changed a lot in that concentration camp. I mean, I still can't get used to this scar, and I still can't get used to the other things that the bioweapons did, to my face. It's hard to get used to. It's hard to get used to, especially when you can't define your attacker. And I'm going to get to that part of the story too, and the church too. I'm just trying to wrap this up, um, about why I have to live in the cheapest hotel and why it's predictable who will be living in these places. That the race of the people will be defined by the economic status, and the economic status will be defined by European nationalist racism as they take over our lands. I've inherited a lot of lands in America that the Europeans will not turn over to me. They do not want me to ever have economic power. And that's why I started with my beginning of my career with Sheldon L. Epstein, who was the first one to deny me personally of economic power, to sabotage my success, to steal my achievements so that he could ensure my poverty. And through my poverty, my helplessness to fight, my helplessness to defend myself. He was the beginning of the adult domino effect, right? Because, of course, they had different strategies to sabotage my mother, and putting me in ghetto schools was a predetermination of my ability to succeed in college. But I was lucky. My mother married a Black South African under the Commonwealth system. And Isaac Martin Tupeti was a Basotho Zulu South African sent by the Jesuits here. And he was sent here by the Jesuits because he was a psychopath. And they didn't mind planting African psychopaths in the Black community to catch ambitious land owning heirs like my mother. Okay? Because there are only so many men that a college educated woman aspiring to be a lawyer is going to be attracted to, and a doctor would be one of them, right? So in DC, she was targeting a doctor. She wanted to marry a doctor. It was her plan. And my uncle was already a doctor. They had sabotaged him by drafting him out of Meharry. He was in Meharry, and they drafted him into the Korean War and made him a drug addict, pedophile. And his kids were born in Germany, and they had some kind of mind control on them too, because, well, because my cousin is a rapist, a child rapist. You don't just come to that. You have to be trained for that. You have to know what you're doing for that. But he was born in Germany, in the military, where my uncle was dragged out of medical school to ruin the financial future of that side of my family, of my aunt's family. They were ruined by the draft, by the European wars, by the European strategies to destroy the indigenous oil landowning people. Because my uncle owned land too. My uncle was an Oklahoma oil heir too. But the Tulsa riots and the Osage flower thefts by Europeans of indigenous people's property in Oklahoma wasn't enough for them. There were personal, individualized campaigns too. There were targeted individuals then too. And my uncle was one of them. They drafted him right out of medical school and wouldn't listen to any appeals. Took him to Germany, where the Nazis did their deal, and then sent him back here as poison. So, of course, they took Isaac Martin Tupeti out of South Africa, where he was in a gang. God knows what he was doing. He became a brain surgeon, so he didn't mind cutting people up one bit. Even if surgery wasn't going to help him, he didn't mind cutting them up one bit. But his heartlessness towards my mother was really damaging to my family. And if you've got a multimillionaire, a guy making over $1 million a year, and your mother, and you grew up with him, since you were 10, and he gives you nothing and tells you, I have a trust fund for you when you die, but while you're living, he gives you nothing because he says, oh, your mother would be mad at me if I gave you anything. Your mother would be mad at me. But when he was dying and I was in Phoenix, he called me to FaceTime me. But by then he was living with a European woman and she cut off the call and wouldn't let him call again or answer. So he called me, he cared about me. He left me in his will. But I didn't get it, right? Because Isaac Martin Tepetti was a psychopath. That's why the Jesuits brought him into the Black community and made him a candidate for marriage to a woman, a good, righteous woman, ambitious, hardworking, brilliant, like my mother, to come in and mess up our family, because we're heirs to so much land. I've got land in North Carolina, South Carolina, Kentucky, Michigan, Illinois, Florida, Nevada, Arizona, and Oklahoma. And they won't let me touch any of it. They won't let me touch any of it. And they have me living in FEMA concentration camps, okay, that are predetermined by the income level, okay? This particular hotel was built with all kinds of electronic surveillance devices right in the rooms. It's surrounded by these tall light posts that sometimes don't work, but that do seem to send a signal to the brilliant headlights on the cars that go by at night. So when a car goes by at night, this light right outside that I showed you last time, it lights up. One of the panels on it lights up. So the enemies here are definitely using car lights and planted lights, fixed lights, as communication signals for their transports and their thefts, just like they did in Houston. In Houston, they had light signals, they had car signals, and you could watch them do the signals, and then you could watch the change in traffic. You could see the truck carrying the stolen, smuggled goods, and you could see their escorts, sometimes as many as 25, 30 cars traveling with them, and a number of glitter headlights, weaponized headlights in that group. You could see it, just like in Arizona on that highway where they're stealing artifacts north of Wickenburg on the road to Las Vegas, just like that, where they had a fixed crew, where I was ambushed and kidnapped and imprisoned and infected with diseases by the Europeans there in Arizona. I know it's unbelievable, but it's all true. It's all true. I mean, if you had told me in the 1970s that Sheldon had filed an EEOC against me and that's why I couldn't get a job, I would have understood. But instead, I didn't understand. I spent all those decades not understanding what happened until 2014 when he died, and all of it was released. And I said, oh my God, it finally makes sense what happened to me. You see, because once Sheldon is being sued, he can go to Brunswick and he can say, I was so good to you, you didn't even pay me. You didn't even pay me for helping Silver Rain Runningcloud. I brought your company, and look what she did to me. Look what Silver Rain did to me. She's such a Nazi. She sued me. And Brunswick couldn't tell me. The European NPR, she just laughed and giggled. And Manuela Ramirez, the head of HR, well, she wouldn't even talk to me about it. And it was really funny. I met her daughter. Her daughter was a freshman at Northwestern the same year I was. So when I found out, I went to meet her because, like, I'd known her mom for 4 summers already and everything. I mean, I'd known her mom for just a couple of months by the time I met Manuela Ramirez's daughter. And she didn't want to have anything to do with American Black people. She looked Black, but she was one of the ones who was like, stay away from me. I'm not one of you. I don't want people to look at me and see a them. I'm a token over here. Leave me alone. Leave me alone. My mother's the head of HR for Brunswick Corporation. My mother makes a lot of money. And my mother makes a lot of money justifying racial discrimination by the Europeans. So who do you think I am, Silver Rain? Who do you think I am? Your friend? Nah. I'm Manuela Ramirez's daughter. Don't you forget it. She was really mean, but I didn't understand all that then. Do you understand? When you're young, it's just like you're going through life and you don't understand what's happening, especially if you're not aware that you are surrounded by people that want your stuff and don't want you anywhere around. They don't want to murder you exactly. They want to exploit all your intellectual ability as long as you're willing to give it up to enrich their society. But ultimately, when you stop giving it up, they're going to want to get rid of you. If you figure out that it's not that they don't know. I used to think all the way through graduate school, I thought, the Europeans just don't know. They just don't know how wonderful we are. If they knew, they would do the right thing. They would be righteous if they knew who we are. They just don't know. They don't know how hard my family works. They don't know about the churches that my family founded. They don't know our moral values. They don't know how much we value education. They don't know how much we appreciate the land. They don't know how much we appreciate good, healthy food. They don't know because they're foreign and they're foreign in our land. And we just need to teach them. I used to believe that. I swear to God, I did. Until in graduate school, I read so much. And then I read the accounts from other races of people because I did comparative literature, which is literature all over the world. And while I read a little bit of French and a little bit of Spanish because I just can't learn that well, I'm a very slow learner in foreign languages, total mental block, but I could read enough to get by. And all the rest of my work I did already in translation, right? Written by somebody, but in American language translation. And when I read one race after another, East Indians, Maharani Mukherjee, talking about European racism, Chinese writers talking about European nationalist racism, Korean writers talking about European nationalist racism, Chicana writers, poets talking about Chinese American Frank Chin, yeah, writing about European nationalist racism, where they say the Chinese call the Europeans ghosts. They don't even see them as having souls because of the vicious war acts against them by the Europeans. Probably the Opium Wars. But there's more. There's the daily stuff. The Japanese American, Obasan, by Joyce Kogawa. Kogawa, I think, right? I read one race of people after another complaining about the same thing, and that's the behavior of the Europeans in their homelands and against their bodies in America. In America, where we all are supposed to believe that there's a covenant, that we're all under God, and that we all have equal access to coming up with business ideas, to developing land, to starting small corporations that become big corporations without other people legislating us out of business. We all came to believe the myths of America and they promoted them. And they did that double talk again and again and again and again and again until the internet presented so many voices like mine, showing you a whole different reality that you never would have found in the public media, in the public broadcasting spaces, that would have been blood libeled out of the public discourse through a process called blood libel, created by the Satanists in 1100 in Eastern Europe. when the people around them, the Christians, started discovering that all their missing children were turning up in an abattoir, run in a synagogue owned by Satanists. And there was a pogrom. It's where the word pogrom got started. It was the first pogrom. And it wasn't against the Jews like Jesus in the Middle East. It was against the Europeans that later call themselves Jews. Ones that we popularly know as Khazarians. Maybe we even call them Ukrainians. I don't really know because I'm not over there in Europe. I just know that the European Christians' children were missing, and they found body parts and pools of blood on the floor and an altar, and worshipers of Baphomet, the baby eater. And the people went insane. They went insane, and they murdered everybody they could find from that synagogue. They murdered them to the point where the word pogrom was born to define this reaction. Well, there were plenty of survivors because it's their culture and it's their homeland. Just like Transylvania is the home of real live vampires, it's their culture. It's their culture. They exist. Maria Tomashko at University of Massachusetts, my dissertation advisor, who refused to read my dissertation. She told us all that vampires exist, that she heard it from her family, that she knew it was true from her family tradition of her ancestors. And it's true anyway, I mean, I personally think Keanu Reeves might be a vampire. I think he's from Lithuania, which is probably the right region. But you know what? I don't really know. I just know I believe vampires are real. A lot of creatures that we consider supernatural, that we've classified as supernatural, exist. And they probably have been hunted and killed and isolated as a danger if they're preying upon Homo sapiens or whatever you want to call us. Right? But when I saw how many people throughout the world had the same complaint about Europeans, I realized they have to know. They're not stupid. They have to know. And once I realized they have to know, I started observing their children. I mean, I didn't come across many of their children for a while, but I started thinking about their children and their children interacting with my children in Woodbridge, Connecticut, and the way the parents treated me to train their children how to treat indigenous people there in Woodbridge, Connecticut. And I started thinking, well, not only are these Europeans actively involved in a social war with me, but they're training their children to carry it on. Right? They're training their children to inherit robbing and killing and hating based on race and racism, European nationalism. Okay, so we got Elon, who hates indigenous wealthy land, rich land owners of the indigenous owners of rich lands. And we've got Vivek from a caste system society who sold out his sister, Nikki Haley, by saying, oh, she's an Indian. And then, of course, all the Europeans are going to be, we'll never vote for her, just like the newscaster said. But we all know that, right? But those two guys are going to be in charge of reforming the government. What do you think is going to happen to me? You think they're going to cut me any slack? You think those are not two racists from two racist races combining forces to wipe the last of the Black and brown indigenous Americans off the scene? That's how I see it, right? So here I am at this hotel. And I told you that last month I started getting terrible heart palpitations. And there's an electronic device in the ceiling here that flashes a red light. I have it covered, or I'd show you. And there's a fire detector that seems to communicate with that. And there's a little another device on the head of the door that sends signals. And these signals can turn your lights on and off in here, but I block them all. I block them all. Okay. Point is in Houston, I could put up a reflective screen to keep the electromagnetic bioweapons out of my sleeping place, right? If I blockaded my window, they could not project those lights into my room. And it was made out of heavy concrete because it was an old motel. It was an old OYO motel owned by East Indians. The OYO motel chain is owned by East Indians. So I was able to protect myself from the heart palpitations and the ear ringing, right? But here at this hotel that they just built, they have installed in the rooms of the hotel where Americans are most likely to stay and Europeans can leave unless they're really down and out on their luck, right? And they're in the room here. So I get these terrible heart palpitations all of a sudden, and they don't feel organic. And I already met a defibrillator machine in Phoenix, Arizona, when I found a training camp for young Nazis. All these Europeans riding around on ATVs, and they wheel out a defibrillator machine while I'm watching them, and I am able to put up my reflective screen so that they can't. But I felt enough of it to know that it was one of those portable defibrillators designed to give people heart attacks, right? Now, when I moved into this hotel, I did not feel physical attacks. Okay. I had just come from the FEMA camp in Houston where I was attacked every time I opened my door. People shot me with projectile weapons, directed energy weapons were aimed at me. They even tampered with food deliveries before I got a hookup through the military. My team got a hookup to get me good food in there. But I had lost so much weight. I know that my family saw me and thought I was dying of starvation. They became very concerned because all the food I ordered from Sam's Club would come, tampered with. People would steal the food, and there were only so many things you could pick that were already cooked because there was no kitchen there and no refrigerator that I could rely on. They had invaded the electrical system from the outside so that they could disable the charging of your notebook so you couldn't do broadcasts. They had done so much add on stuff that when I got here, I knew how to protect myself, but I can't protect myself from devices in my room, communicating with things built right outside my room in a place built to be an open air prison. Okay? Built to be that way. Now, when these heart palpitations happened, I had to go to the hospital and get into all that horribleness. And they, took my blood. Who knows if they put something in me when they took my blood? The European man poked my stomach where I'm having a lot of problems and said, "This isn't bothering you?" How did he know? How did he know that there was a bioweapon planted there inside of me? How did he know that? But all the Europeans are making money on one side of the curtain, one side of the door to the emergency department. All of the people of the Indio, the poor people of Indio, the working people, the indigenous people of Indio are sitting on the other side, the front desk, the guard, the patients. But on the inside, all Europeans except for the orderly. Okay? And they're poking and they're rushing around and they're working in a space so crowded that if there were any kind of workplace legislation, they would demand more space. But they put them in this crowded space with this hectic attitude because it will make them less compassionate to human beings. It will make them ruder, more abrupt, because they themselves are suffering in this space for 12 hours, right? They're suffering in this space for 12 hours, and it makes them callous, and it makes them cruel, and it makes them arrogant. And when they leave in their nice clothes so obviously nicer than any of the quality clothes we've got, except for me, because I'm lucky. I have a source. But even my clothes are cheap. They're not expensive clothes. They're not clothes I used to wear in the 1980s from Saks and I. Magnons and Marshall Fields. They're nicer than cheap clothes, but they're not top of the rack clothes that I used to have when I was younger, before the Europeans totally trapped me in poverty and hopelessness. I know I told you my credit rating went down a whole nother close to what, 100 more points. They're going to make sure that I can't get out of here, even if I can get out of here, because they've centralized the real estate market. I can't go to somebody and say, you know me, I'm good. I'll pay you the rent. Work with me. Fill this vacancy you've got. Can't do that anymore, because now there are agencies that control that to make sure I don't get in, to make sure he doesn't get in, she doesn't get in, and to make sure that they do get in, those Europeans. So they've used immigration for a long time to control their ability to invade indigenous people's rights to land and business and commerce and money. They've used it as an economic sanction for a long time. So when the H-1 visas came out, they came out at just the time when the affirmative action graduates of computer science were emerging into the work market, right? But in India, they had access to global education. They could go to school anywhere they wanted because they owned the assets of India. Plus, they owned a lot of assets in Africa, right? Remember Gandhi in South Africa and how much racism against the Africans Gandhi showed? Well, remember that movie, Mississippi Marsala, with Denzel Washington, where he falls in love with an East Indian and they show East Indian racism towards American Black people? So for East Indians, they have wealth. The Europeans didn't come in and buy their land up from under them. The Europeans didn't come in and undermine their economy. The Europeans did not come in and steal their stuff. They got everything they own in their country and everything they acquired through imperialism, right? So when the East Indians came here, they didn't have to work their way up in a consulting company. They could own a consulting company, hire a few Europeans, and then put their men in. So just at the time when Americans, indigenous Americans, are working through the educational system to get educated in the high-paying job fields like computer science, the East Indians all flow in on the H-1 visa and create, just like a layer of icing in a cake, they create an entire level of management right over our heads. I'll never forget, I was doing a consulting job with Amoco Oil. And by then they had made it third party. You couldn't negotiate your own contracts with the corporations and cut the middleman out. There were all kinds of Europeans running consulting companies where they would place you and take a free piece of your money. They would charge $45 an hour for you, and you'd only get maybe 32 or 35, right? And then a guy named Moynihan, a representative of the United States Corporation based in Hawaii, he starts working with another guy who's a European. Moynihan's a Japanese Hawaiian, works with a European, and they make sure through Ronald Reagan's presidency, they make sure that people like me building their own computer software and development and systems analysis companies couldn't get anywhere without shaking hands with the European and settling for a bit and being controlled. So I'm starting to get phased out of the jobs that I want. They're starting to channel me into documentation instead of systems programming, right? And at Illinois Bell, they actually fired me when I went for a job with AT&T to help develop the Unix system, even though I was more qualified and my clients were more satisfied with me than my predecessor, who was a pay grade ahead of me. Nothing but complaints. And he got sent to Western Electric, which was considered a tech step up. He got sent to Western Electric in Lisle, and I got fired when I realized they were not going to promote me to the grade I had earned. They broke all their promises to me about, if you achieve this, you get this reward. We can't discriminate, because they were discriminating against me so much and lying that I had to, say, okay, what exactly? And then just lie, right? And then they fire me rather than let me take the next step into technology. And then I discovered at Loyola University that most of the education is word of mouth among the young European men, where I learned so much working at Loyola University after I had my first baby. I worked at Loyola University and took a few classes. And while I was there, I worked as a computer center consultant because I'd been a programmer. And that's where I learned beginning of video games. People who were beginning to develop and test video games were there. And that was my dream. I wanted to create a video game company because I had a degree in literature. So I knew that my role-playing game stories and fantasies would be absolutely fantastic. And I wanted to create things like The Legend of Zelda and The Secret of Mana and Dragon. What was it called? I played the Dragon one all the way up to the fourth game, right? And to create things like The Sims, which I just loved. That was my goal, but they made sure, the Europeans made sure to cut me out of it. And one of the ways that they did that was by importing through the H-1 visas a lot of better educated, richer, more autonomous East Indians. Just fill them in like icing in a cake and cut me out, put me near the bottom where all the syrup is. How could I get around it? If it's word of mouth and they won't talk to you, how are you going to learn anything? If you read a manual and it's all gobbledygook because it depends on word of mouth, how are you going to ever learn anything? How are you going to compete? So they made it very hard for my company, Crystal Data Systems, to survive. But I did. Started doing home repairs. When I quit graduate school, I started doing, network upgrades for people. Put the hard drive in, replace the CPU, tell them how to work it, show them, load up their software. I started doing just a little bit of that. But then Best Buy, Staples, and another computer services store got into the home maintenance and repair market, the home computer market. So I got squeezed out there too. Could not make my company grow there either, right? But these were things I tried in my 40s, my mid 40s, my late 30s. And I'd been achieving all my life, right? Not anybody can get into Yale University. You got to have something going for you. You've got to have achievements. You got to have recommendations. And I did. My recommendations came from Leon Forrest, who is the chairman of Black Literature, Black Studies at Northwestern University. Leon Forrest made the phone call that got me into Yale. Phone call, right? But I had turned a literature degree from Northwestern into a computer science profession in the top 1% of earning women in America. But the Europeans weren't going to let me keep that. So they used immigration. Now, the reason that they're upset or pretending to be upset about immigration now, it isn't because there's much difference. Do you know how much government money the Jews got? They got enough money to buy real estate and manage it and sell it when their children are adults for millions of dollars and their children are millionaires and didn't have to do a thing to do it. When I was at the San Diego Psychiatric Hospital, at my hearing to be declared legally sane, the Christian European working for the patient advocacy organization told me that he's only allowed to represent Jews, that his company was founded and is funded on the basis that he collects data on everyone that's suffering from psychiatric malpractice, using psychiatry as a prison for dissidents to the European takeover of America. He told me that he could come and be there. He could set up the hearing, but he couldn't say a word because the Jews won't let him, and the Jews pay him. And the Jews pay him through the government block grants. He told me this. I guess he resented it so much. But Juan Luis Fernandez told me plenty of things about how many Argentinian Jews were living there in Connecticut, in Orange and West Haven and Woodbridge too, and how much of their money came from public aid. Why, he walked me all through the public aid system. He walked me all through the public aid system. And on my own, I couldn't even get group therapy. Not even when I went to Dr. Faye Heisler at the Franciscan Life Center. I thought that with the Franciscan Life Center, I'd get a fair shot, but they hired a German Nazi, Faye Heisler, and she used to just sit and kind of laugh at all my problems. Did she put me in group therapy? No. And what happened to me? Suicide. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing I could do. They blocked every avenue to economic and social success for me, and were squeezing me out of society altogether. There was no place for me to go but heaven, right? But, if you kill yourself, you go to purgatory. You don't go to heaven, right? You don't go to heaven. You go to purgatory. And that's where I got my second chance to come back. I said to the angels that were there, because I felt like I was home, I really did. And they said that they were going to, do my numbers and let me know that they were so busy. There were so many people dying, so many souls to process. And so when I came back to find out what would happen to me, they said, well, you can go back if you want, or you can stay. And I said, well, and then they showed me the earth with all the light beings on it. And they said, those are your children. If you leave, it's going to have a terrible effect on your son. Your daughter, she'll make it all right, but your son will suffer in the end. That pretty much made up my mind that I would have to go back, but I was trying to figure out, well, I might be more of a liability in the long run, as I've become now, where nobody can afford to talk to me because my enemies are Yale and Harvard and Columbia and Swarthmore and UCLA. My enemies are academics who work for the government, the experts, the highest echelon. Those are my enemies. Why I lost all my friends from Northwestern. No one wanted their children's futures tainted with my stuff. Nobody did. I lost all my friends. And I thought going to Yale was going to increase my friends, because people would have children who would want recommendations from a Yale professor. It didn't go like that. They wouldn't let it go like that. Just like Sheldon L. Epstein of Winnetka or Wilmette wouldn't let me become a lawyer, a corporate lawyer. He kiboshed it. Well, so they did so at Yale too. They just stepped in the middle of my shit, ruined it. Just like they did at Illinois Bell when I tried to get into the high tech track. They squashed me. So I've achieved at the highest levels. You couldn't do better than computer industry in the 80s. You couldn't do better in the employment market. I made it from literature. I made it there. You couldn't do better than Northwestern University. Okay? Top 10 when I went there. I made it there. I went to 13 schools during my childhood? 13 schools in two different countries, 12 different states or cities, and yet I still made it to a top 10 university, right? Because as I was telling you, when my mother married Isaac Martin to Petty, immigration decided he could not do his internship and residency here. They sent all of the immigrant students out because they said, we don't have enough American doctors. So all you foreign medical school graduates, you got to go. You got to get out of here. We don't care where you go, but get out of here. So Isaac had to leave suddenly after his graduation. But because he was South African and South Africa was controlled by the Boers, Boers, the British, Elon Musk's people. He was able to go to a Commonwealth country. So he went to Canada. And that's why I got a good education. They had me tracked through housing discrimination and through career control of my parents. They had me tracked to live in the ghetto like everybody else. They had us all tracked. They forced us off of the lands we owned and worked in the South, and they forced us up north so they could discriminate and wipe us out one by one, infiltrate our communities, infiltrate our farms, infiltrate everything. What the myth of the slave plantation didn't do for them, the first Great Migration did. It drove us off the land. We're no longer there occupying. We're no longer there defending because they sent the Ku Klux Klan in at one point to drive us off during the second migration, right? So the Black people go north thinking they're going to have a chance, thinking that the Northerners are abolitionists, but they're not. They're just more Europeanized in their oppression. And they already have a plan that you're going to get the worst. They're building the worst for you. They'd already started building the worst in places like Oklahoma in the early 1900s. When my great grandfather B.H. Deck co-founded one of the original colored towns in Lima, Oklahoma, they built a school. And a guy named Rosenwald, who later became a CEO at Sears Corporation for his scheming and his robbing of indigenous people. He sold my grandfather inferior school designs and inferior products. And that school is falling apart, and the government will not give us any money to reinstate our landmarks. And I found the same thing in North Carolina. In North Carolina, I found a church with maybe 5 people in it, and they were taking care of a graveyard that went back centuries of indigenous American people, and they couldn't get money. They couldn't get money. And I wanted to help them. And I wanted to use Yale credentials to help them. But Yale kiboshed that, right? Henry Louis Gates squashed that because he wants to go through life telling lies about records that don't exist to prove that all the Black people were slaves so they can keep that myth going. But most Black people were not slaves. Most Black people were the landowners. And it was when the Europeans come in waving their papers, but more importantly, waving their guns and their hanging lynching ropes. When they come in doing all that, well, there was nothing you could do but go. If you wanted to live, you're going to go and hope that one day I would be born to tell the truth about it. So they made sure that I couldn't live anywhere but here. And then they know that if they come in at a price point, the lowest price point for the lowest price point in the decent category, they know that I and my kind, the ones deliberately created in this economic status, deliberately through tricks of immigration, through terrorism to drive me off my land, through the misconduct of the probate courts, through sabotage of men like Sheldon and Epstein, and through blood libel, right? Blood libel. Blood libel created in Europe. And what blood libel did was it created a strategy for hiding the Satanists, the men who were sacrificing Christian babies and babies outside of their cult. They wanted to be able to continue to do this. So they wanted to control what the public saw and what the public thought. They wanted to control public discourse. The real President Trump called it fake news, but it was more than fake news. It was fake news in combination with government agencies that would create laws and policies and hire people that would act in the same interests to force these conclusions. So me being here is not an accident. So the idea that a building could be built expecting people like me to end up here would not be an accident. Isn't that how they trapped me at the East Indian OYO Hotel in Houston, Texas? And didn't schemers from Honda in Arizona make sure that they stole my good car and left me with a wreck that couldn't take me farther than that? I couldn't go farther than Texas, right? And if I went to California back then, well, I was afraid of Roger. Roger at San Diego, at the Orchard on Point Loma. He had hit me in the head and gave me a concussion. He watered down my ceiling and made it fall in on me. He told me the day I moved in, at least you're not a big black man, but you'll be out of here in 2 years anyway. And by the way, I used to write for the newspapers. The police are my friends. And he wasn't lying. He wasn't lying that day. 2 years, I was running for my life. I left that place with no place to go. I had to spend a couple of days living in my car. I left with only what I could carry in my car, just like when I left Connecticut when Juan invaded my home and told me, "You've been conquered," and moved into my house and committed violent acts against me and my property and controlled my environment. So I'm living in chaos, papers all around, total mess, chaos. Can't think straight in chaos, right? But Juan did a lot of good things too. He did a lot of good things too. And like most people, with Stockholm syndrome, I'll never stop loving Juan, even though I'm sure he's a psychopath and ultimately did not mean me well. And then was the reason I had to hit the road. I had to flee because he was threatening my life. He was threatening my life. He hit me. And I knew if he hit me again, I was going to kill him. Because that's how black women roll. I mean, I don't know about all black women, but the ones in my clan, you hit us, you're dead. You're dead meat. We're not going to let you bruise us up and hit us. You hit us and it'll be one of the last things you get to do. So I didn't want to go to jail for killing Juan, for murder, because I knew that even in self-defense, it wasn't going to go well for me because I'm not European. And I'm not a man. So I had to flee. And that's what put me on the road in the first place. That's why I'm not in my comfortable little home in the forest of Connecticut in the first place, because Juan invaded he targeted me, found me, knew I was living by myself, invaded me in the group therapy because, well, after I committed suicide and came back, oh yeah, see, I told the angels, I said, I'm not going back unless you promise me my life won't be stupid anymore. Because I'm rotting. I'm living a stupid, wasted life. I'm not being able to fulfill any of my missions, none of my ambitions, none of my dreams. Everything I do, they grab me and tie me up. So I don't want to go back to that life if it's going to be stupid. And they came back and they sent me back, which means that either they don't care what I demanded, right? Or God agreed that your life won't be stupid. Well, I can tell you one thing, it hasn't been stupid. Okay? If you've been following my broadcast since 2014, you know how unstupid my life has been. you know how unstupid my life has been. Now, I don't know if, my Facebook, I know that they took down a lot of my stories, a lot of the series. I think I was the first person to create narrative series on Facebook where I told a story. But I used to work 18 hours a day writing for Facebook, and I did it for a couple of years. I did it to the point where I was identified as a global influencer, and where they were releasing products based on my development of them and fulfilling the next level of need. So I did a lot of user testing, a lot of user input, a lot of user generated demands on Facebook. But did they acknowledge me? Did they give me a job? No. They just deleted some of my most valuable intellectual properties in their upgrades and left their artificial intelligence to answer me. And that means no response. You're ignored. You don't exist. You're not a person. We can do whatever we want to you and your intellectual property, and there's not a doggone thing you can do about it. At the John F. Kennedy Hospital here, they actually make you sign an electronic document from a third-party company that pretty much says, once you sign this, we can do whatever we want to you. What was I going to do? Die of a heart attack or sign the thing? I shouldn't have signed it. I shouldn't have. I'm so mad at myself for signing it, but I did sign it. And I probably didn't have to. And then I find out a whole nother company does the billing and they won't listen to me either. They won't give me an itemized bill because they know that everybody is discharging their debts, right? Everybody's listening to the advisors who tell you how to discharge your debt by using the coupon, the invoice coupon, so that these companies don't double dip into your treasury account based on your birth certificate bond. But they found a way around that where they won't even give you the itemized bill. You call the hospital, they say, oh, we don't have a billing department anymore. You don't have a billing? No, we don't. A third party handles it. You call the third party and some call center in the Philippines answers. And you give and they verify your account for 15 minutes where you continue to be asked your information. And then they say, we're sorry, we don't send itemized bills. You'll have to go to the hospital. And you say, but the hospital has no billing department. And they say, we're going to put your failure to pay on your credit report if you don't pay us. It's a shakedown. Shakedown. You go to the emergency room because you think you're dying and you care to live. And they exploit that. Okay. So here I am in a hotel where I would be expected to be, just like I was in Houston. And here I am having the symptoms of a heart attack. Now, since I've been here, my pain has escalated. It's gotten greater. All my ribs hurt. This side of my face right here is going numb. And I get ears ringing in the middle of the night. At about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, it gets very hot in here, hot enough to wake me up no matter where I have the temperature or the window open. My body itself gets hot as if I'm being cooked by microwaves. And then I get these heart palpitations, my ears ringing so loud it wakes me up, right? And now my face is getting numb. So I think somebody is giving me a stroke. So last night, 3 o'clock in the morning, I actually left the room. I said, when they woke me up with the pain, and I'm starting to get heart palpitations, and I feel my face is still numb, right? All through here, numb, numb, numb. Where they put the bioweapons, right? Because, I really think that, what did they call it when they were talking about the COVID vaccinations and they were talking about how one process builds on another process and that builds on another process. So it's a staged attack. Well, I think that the only reason I'm still sitting here is because the previous stages of the bioweapon attack were addressed and diminished by me, right? When they put the implant in my ear, I got rid of it for the most part. Every now and then I'll feel a little trace of it, and be able to get something, maybe, you know, the Morgellons. I was able to address that right away because my ex-husband was a doctor and I grew up with all those medical books. So I knew to respond right away and how. So I have been able to not destroy, but compromise each previous step in the implantation of disease in my body through bioweapons from my enemies who want to claim my land, but they want to feed the medical system a little bit. They want to feed social media a little bit because I still probably have the record at over 68,000 tweets created in a certain amount of time. I probably still hold the record for tweets that Elon Musk's denying me because he's a Nazi Werner von Braun, and he was never about free speech. He's about taking over. And now that he's controlling the Trump avatar puppet, which they beta tested with Biden, he's controlling that puppet with his Starlink system that can create three-dimensional holograms that look real. He's ready to be the president now. And we know that he's Werner von Braun, who rode in the convertible with John F. Kennedy, who came over with the Nazis with Operation Paperclip, who has been working all this time with a longer lifespan than we have, working all this time to steal American land and make slaves out of the people and confiscate our property. So here we are, and here I am. Okay? Now, if my face is getting numb, that means that they are creating stroke conditions in me, right? And then my ribs were hurting so much that when I moved, I would feel pain in the left side on my ribs. So last night I left the room and went into my car because over the Christmas holiday, I left this hotel and I recovered. Okay? I'm so tired every day because I get awakened and my service dog gets awakened too. And I get so tired every day because I didn't get to sleep the night before, because they're attacking me through the night. And it's making my thoughts disorganized. It's making my living space disorganized because I don't have any energy to do anything, right? And it's only because I was attacked that I'm even talking to you. Because one thing I learned in Houston is after I inform my crew of the intricacies of the attacks, there's some relief. So for me to be here as an insider, as an informer, as a commander, prisoner of war, still able to communicate with my troops, my people, my leaderships, well, that's a very important place to be. You see, and that's not a stupid life, is it? Oh, it's not a comfortable life. It's not a fun life, but it's a useful life. It's useful. So the only reason, that I'm even really reporting now is because I want the pain to stop. Okay? And having the pain stop is more important to me than protecting myself as a coward and trying to blend in and trying to ignore it and trying to pretend that what's happening isn't really happening to me. But it is. It is really happening to me. I really am under attack. Okay? And they use this bioweapon in my abdomen, moves around too, and is a part of the attack on my heart. But it's not as effective as it would be if I had not taken steps to compromise the effectiveness of the bioweapons that have been implanted inside of me and that are projected inside of me. Because somebody hit me in the chin the other day before it started to get numb, and I got a little pimple here, right? And they also hit me in the eye and cut my contacts. So I'm already triggered a lot about Houston, right? I've been triggered a lot, like this particular hotel, and perhaps the other one too, at least one room in the other one. The first room they put me in during my last stay there was being subjected to microwaves. But I moved to a different room that doesn't seem to be in the path, but it could be, because I did see people in the other hotel clear away a bush that has a direct access to my room. And I noticed that when I started feeling discomfort there, you see. So whatever these attacks are on me, they leave me totally exhausted. So I don't even want to go outside. It's hard for me to keep my space neat as I had been doing. It's hard for me to function, right? Because they wake me up every night, every 2 hours, every 2 hours. They wake me up every night. But when I went to California for Christmas, my room was not booby trapped. There were no weapons being aimed at me, and I got to see the difference. I got to get myself together. Driving there, I got to get myself together. Getting out of the line of fire, I was able to get myself together. And through getting myself together, I was able to confirm that in these spaces, I am under attack. Okay? Now, as I told you, the Europeans are making big moves in the desert. They must have found some technology that maybe the Boring Company technology that lets them work through mountains and work through sands and aggregate waters. So they've reached a level in their development where they can control the water and they can control the land. So they're building more and more communities that block Americans off. Okay. And then they're putting the hospitals in to sabotage the health and to work as processing centers for radioactive materials. They are building universities that have no students. We saw a lot of that in Arizona. And here in downtown Indio, they're building a university. Okay. Downtown, where they drove all of the indigenous people and the black landowners. They've driven them off, most of them off. There's still some remnants, but most of them off. They closed down the churches. They infiltrated the black churches that survived. I mean, I've been to two churches, and two black churches I participate in. And among the black people in each church, there's at least one European. And in both churches, the Europeans have very nasty attitudes. They don't seem to be helping the church grow or survive. And I've had both of the European women in the black churches have confrontations directly with me. In fact, the last one, she looked at me and her eyes looked like boiled eggs. She was filled with rage. And she said, "I like your hair." Because she knows that when black people are wearing wigs, that if you want to insult a black woman in a wig, talk about her hair a lot, right? Because we all know this is not my real hair, right? But she wanted to insult me. And so she did. But it was the look of rage and contempt in her eyes that stays with me, because she's not worshiping with black people because she loves us. She's worshiping with black people to infiltrate. And I don't know. I heard from a lovely lady I know that a lot of the property that belonged to the black churches was taken, confiscated by the city of Indio. Sound like the Department of Transportation much? Okay. So they're going to be dissidents like me, and they're going to want to put them in prisons, and they're going to know that we have no money because they're going to know that we were identified young. We were identified the moment we became heirs. Okay? And the only question left after you become an heir is, are you pro-European or are you pro-American? And if you can answer that, they know what to do with you. They can either turn you and use you, or they can wipe you out as slow or fast as they like. So when I leave this room, I don't have the chest pain. Okay, the numbness is persisting. This started the day before yesterday. I still have the numbness, but I'm not under attack. So I got in my car yesterday, like early this morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I stayed there until 6 a.m. trying to rest, trying to block off the windows. And while I'm sitting in my car, somebody comes and sits in the truck parked right next to my vehicle. And he fiddles with his car quite a bit, and he gets in his big SUV for a while, everything. Now, parked in that space one day, I saw a car parked that had a medallion on the back that said California Highway Police, CHP. And his car was parked near my car. So I don't know what that's about, but like most targeted individuals, once you realize how insidious the targeting process is and how sneaky and how deliberate and how invasive, once you realize all of that, you realize that all bets are off, that you don't know where the attacks are coming from, right? So why did that man suddenly appear and then want to spend an hour in a truck right next to where I'm trying to sleep in my car? What kind of coincidence is that? And then he finally drove away, right? But then I come back here and I'm able to sleep a little bit without being under attack. And then the ear ringing begins again, right? And the chest pain tries to start up. I'm in my car. I can take a deep breath. I don't get interstitial pain in my ribs. I'm in this room. I do. This room has electronic devices. Okay, I'm going to share this and then I'm out. So I had some funny communications with the manager of the hotel, right? Now, don't forget that Donna Marie Joubert, the manager at the OYO Hotel FEMA camp in Houston, Texas, when I asked her, was she a police, she said no. I'm a bounty hunter. And then she went off to a training or two. And when she comes back again, she's Sergeant Donna Marie Joubert, and she stopped showing up any place I can see her. They say she's working at the other hotel that she manages. Now, Donna Marie Joubert was having me pay her directly instead of paying through the hotel system. But they did not fire her for that. She was not fired. But I was paying her a discounted price, and she used a handheld Visa processing card to process my payments. And when I had a complaint, and the company said, we don't have any booking for you. And I said, what? You don't have? Well, I'm right here. I've been here for 2 years now. What do you mean you have no booking for me? And they're like, well, we have no booking for you. And that was when I realized that Donna Marie Joubert was taking a certain amount of customers and running them through her own company, and that the OYO hotel knew nothing about it. So I blew it up on YouTube. I tagged the owner of the OY hotel. But Donna Marie Joubert, last time I checked, is still working there because Adrian, the maintenance guy, told me that FEMA took over that hotel. Okay? FEMA. And this is after I had suspected I was living in a FEMA camp. And I suspected I was living in a FEMA camp because Rex Bear on Leak Project told us years ago in 2017, 2018, that the enemies of America, the Europeans, were planning to make FEMA camps and murder a lot of Americans, that they were collecting body bags, that they were emptying out Walmarts. He had informers from all over the country telling him about railroad cars that looked like they were for cattle steerage, that seemed to be modified for people, about cages being transported. And it was all based around insider disclosures about the Europeans using FEMA camps to silence any opposition to their takeover of American lands and waters and resources and airspace, right? So I knew that the FEMA camps were a possibility, but I never thought I'd have anything to do with it until I find myself there and I see how officious and strange Donna Marie is acting. Donna's acting so strange. And I can't figure out why Miss Donna is acting so funny. And I start to say she's acting officious, as if she has some secret power over me. And she tells me that she was watching me for the 2 years that I lived there before she even made contact with me. And she made contact with me by bringing my packages to my room because I couldn't leave my room because my car had been repoed by the car thieves and Geico that wouldn't even honor or create a claim on my car. And CarMax wouldn't report any of the damage because Geico wouldn't report any of the damage. And then they sold that car VIN number in Mississippi to somebody there. But they had me without transportation, trapped in the cheapest hotel because that was what I could afford. Because they made sure that the IRS affected my benefactor so that he could not pay me, or not pay me, but he could not keep me in a better place anymore, right? And when you know they're insidious like that, then you take everything. You don't take any bit of information for granted, right? Because you know they're attacking you in so many ways. Because you know their goal is to get all they can out of you and then throw you away. And your suffering, your luge, your pain, your suffering, your fear, your frustration. Well, we've heard from different sources of knowledge that even that is a commodity among some forms of existence. Even my pain is a commodity out here. So as long as I'm producing, as long as I'm giving milk, I get to stay, right? So here I am with my credit rating constantly falling in a society that has everything built on credit rating. Everything that to do with a place to live has to do with your credit rating. You have to jump through a lot of European hoops to get a place to live. Even if you want to buy an RV or a car, you've got to please the Europeans in many, many ways. So here I am being attacked in this room. My face is numb, my heart keeps beating, my ribs hurt, and I have no place else to be, right? I can be out in the car that was given to me. Like somebody gave me a car, my family gave me a car. I can sleep in my car tonight to escape it. But not if there's going to be a surveillance agent parked next to me with a camera on my car to see when I move my car so he can come out and follow me, right? So as soon as I get out of my car at 6:15 this morning to come back to this room, I see glitter lights focused on my pathway, focused to see me, the glitter light car. So I walk around and kind of hide myself. I walk around and take my little dog to be walked over there. And the next thing I know, a set of glitter lights are coming down this street where there's not any need for much traffic. And then another set of glitter lights are coming out of that Fairfield Inn hotel across the street. So they're doing surveillance, right? Doing surveillance on me with the glitter light weaponized cars. So I'm triggered. I'm triggered for Houston big time, right? Triggered for Houston big time. But the reason I left my room last night was because of this piece of evidence. The manager at this hotel, I like him. I have a wonderful emotional response of affection and love for him when I see him. And that's true. But I've loved a lot of people that didn't mean me any good. I've loved a lot of psychopaths. I've loved a lot of men who hurt me in the end. So I don't trust that so much. I like him, you know, but I think he's dangerous. So lately, if I ask him a question, he says, well, I think that's really private and I don't think that's appropriate for me to talk about with a customer. Okay. Now this is when I said, how was your Christmas? And he said it wasn't good. And I said, oh, really? Why? He said, well, I think that's private. I don't really feel comfortable discussing that with you. But that was the second or third time. That was the third time that he said that to me for the same kinds of a conversation, that I'm asking the next logical question in a conversation. And he says, that's too personal. You are on that side. I am on this side. Right. So I thought for a minute, I thought, well, maybe he's feeling the vibes that I'm feeling. And maybe he has to remind himself that we'll never date each other, even though we feel for each other. So I'm thinking maybe I'll interpret it like that rather than go there to the targeted individual side of the board. Maybe I'll stay positive. Maybe I'll try to think of it in a before I knew context. So I'm thinking maybe it's that. But then the next time it happens, I'm pretty sure it's not that. And the next time it happens, I'm pretty sure it's not that. And I start to get the feeling I got with Miss Donna Marie Joubert. I start to get the feeling that he has some power over me, that he has to be sure he doesn't care about me as a person because ultimately he plans to hurt me in some way. Okay? That's why he has to keep saying to me, you're a customer, I'm a provider of lodging. We are not on the same page. You are away from me. We are not two people. There is a power problem here. And to me, he's warning me, I can hurt you. I can hurt you. So I start to think about that and I'm being triggered. I'm like seeing Donna Marie Joubert. So yesterday I came in and I asked him some really quick questions and he surprisingly answered. He didn't say you're crossing my boundaries because then we had a big conversation. He said, I'm not trying to be rude. It's just that blah blah blah. And I said, well, that's okay. I understand you have your boundaries and part of getting to know someone is getting to know their boundaries. So you're telling me your boundaries, I'll respect them. But last night when I came in from church and from going to visit my friend and she's a senior citizen more than I am. So just bring her little surprises now and then. So I went to visit my friend and her husband and I come back and I asked the manager, I say, "Are you military?" And he says, "No." And I think he said that he used to be, or but I'm not sure. It was a more complicated answer than a clean no. But I was nervous because I was asking him these questions that could very well violate his boundaries, and I'm being triggered. I'm already triggered. So I said, are you a policeman? And he said, no. And I said, do you work for FEMA? And he said, well, I used to, and I'm on their call list. I used to put out fires, for FEMA. They're a great organization. So then I went to my room. Okay. I mean, I didn't ask him in a nice way. I asked him in a real kind of authoritative way because that was the mood that I was in. I didn't know how else to approach it. And he told me, okay. Now, when he said that he worked for FEMA, but wasn't working for FEMA right now, I got that feeling that I got when I remember Donna Marie Joubert telling me she was a bounty hunter, right? She didn't tell me I was the prey, but that was implied as time went on. So now I'm having the symptoms of being attacked by directed energy weapons designed to add value to bioweapons that have already been put inside me. And I'm having one of the perpetrators admit that he's affiliated with the organization that financed and created these things. Well, thank you for joining me. Silver Rain Running Cloud. Over and out.